Welcome back. We're continuing to keep an eye on the legal developments inside the courtroom where the prosecution is delivering its closing arguments in former President Trump's criminal hush money trial. But we now turn to the political developments. And today, for the first time since this trial began, the Biden campaign held a press conference outside the Lower Manhattan courtroom. Michael Fanone and Harry Dunn, two law enforcement officials who were attacked during the January 6th riot at the Capitol, and actor Robert De Niro spoke for the Biden campaign.
This is the time to stop him by voting him out once and for all. We don't want to wake up after the election saying, what, again? My God, what the hell have we done? We can't have that happen again.
Donald Trump is the greatest threat to our democracy and the safety of communities across the country today. He has encouraged and continued to encourage political violence.
This election is about Donald Trump and his vision for the office of the President of the United States, not as a public servant who answers to the people who elected him, but as an authoritarian who answers to and serves only himself.
The Biden campaign press conference comes in the wake of NBC News reporting that the Biden campaign was considering a change in strategy and a more aggressive posture after the trial. The Trump campaign responded to the Biden press conference, calling it a sign of desperation. Joining me now on set is Deepa Shivaram. She's a White House correspondent for NPR. Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today. Maria Teresa Kumar, president and CEO of Voto Latino and an NBC News contributor, and Republican strategist Lance Trover. So thank you all for being here. Deepa, I want to start with you. It was a really interesting scene to see the Biden campaign try to come and capitalize on this trial coverage. What's their logic here since they stayed away from this for so long?
Yeah, they had stayed away from it so long, and then we see Robert De Niro outside the courthouse. The first time that they're kind of weighing in on this. I think it was really interesting because they didn't just comment on the fact that Trump has been, in the middle of this trial. This wasn't really about Trump. They really tried to make that hard pivot to this is about democracy, right? Bringing in these officers from January 6th, making that the focus of their kind of counterpoint to all of this, because we know that that is something that voters, specifically Democratic voters, do have a lot of concerns about. So they're trying to draw attention to their own issues by staging this kind of press conference outside the courthouse. But it was really notable because they haven't really weighed in this far, as you said.
And I was talking to the Biden campaign today, and an official there told me that they really wanted to make sure that they capitalized sort of on the coverage of this, that they wanted to make this case. But do you think they really got out of it what they wanted, given that they came with these politically overt sort of figures, even though, they're actors, they're law enforcement, but they also are people who have been very outwardly talking in the Democratic Party?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think we'll have to see how much that kind of holds traction with folks as this goes forward. I think a lot of voters I speak to are certainly not super clued into this trial day in and day out. It's not something that they're very much paying attention to. But I will say, like I said before, that argument about democracy, threats to democracy, bringing up January 6th, I think as folks tune in more to the election as the months go on, we're about 5 months out now, that is something that people really stop and do remember. Oh, do you remember, what it felt like on January 6th, what it looked like on January 6th? Yeah. Reminding folks of that is something that when I speak to voters out on the road, like they really do remember that. And I cover Nevada a lot. We were talking about this outside. I remember talking to a lot of voters there, even back in 2022, saying, I'm voting Democrat for the first time because I'm concerned about a peaceful transfer of power. So that's very top of mind for a lot of voters I speak to.
Susan, what did you make of this decision by the Biden campaign?
I think they're very concerned about what they're calling Trump amnesia. And that is the idea that Americans who were distressed by elements of Trump's presidency have kind of forgotten the things they didn't like and remembered the things they didn't like. I'm thinking even of the USA Today Suffolk University poll. In our last poll, we asked, did you approve of the job Donald Trump did as president? And he got a higher approval rating than he ever got during his actual presidency. So I think they're trying to remind people, think hard about this before you remember it in the kind of a soft focus, what Donald Trump's presidency was like for you.
Teresa, what do you make of the timing of this? They could have waited a couple days later when we will likely probably have a verdict, though we don't know how long it's going to take the jury to deliberate, but they wanted to do it now.
I think part of it, folks are concerned with the verdict. And this allows you to talk about the importance of democracy going into an election, because let's not forget, the reason that there was no red wave in large part was, yes, abortion was on the ballot, but also you had everybody tuning in over the summer about when they were talking about the January 6th committee hearings. And that reminded people what the ballot was. So I think we're going to see a little bit more of that. We're going to see people reminding of the anxiety that people felt when they woke up in the morning. And this is the challenge that the campaign has right now, is that the economy is revving for many, but there's also a lot of folks with the gig economy, second jobs, where the economy is not delivering in places like Nevada and Arizona. And so for them, they're under the impression that maybe it was better under Trump. And so they're going to see, what I'm looking for is that you're going to see them a reminder that democracy is on the ballot. We're working along the economy. But at the end of the day, who made you feel safer when you went to bed at night?
And Lance, I'm going to play some sound from you, because right after Robert De Niro and these law enforcement officials walked away from those mics, the Trump campaign came right up. Take a listen to what they said.
After months of saying that politics had nothing to do with this trial, they showed up and made a campaign event out of a Lower Manhattan trial day for President Trump. This is all politics. If you don't think this is politics, then why did the Democrats wheel out a retread like Robert De Niro to try to change the subject?
Now, the Biden campaign told me we knew that they were going to attack us for being overly political, being a witch hunt. We made the consideration that we still want to come out today and do this. But it was a risk that they took, because now you could have someone like Jason Miller come out and say this is all connected. What do you make of this, Lance?
I've talked to a number of Republican strategists today, political type people, and they're all scratching their heads saying, what were the Biden people thinking? Donald Trump has been very effective for the last few weeks saying this is a politically charged trial. It is a Biden trial. It is run by the Democrats. And what do? They step out in front of the microphones and the cameras today and make it a political trial. I think they ran right into exactly what the Trump people wanted to do today.
Maria, what do you make of that? Teresa, what do you make of that?
I go back to my original statement. I actually think people are concerned with what this trial is going to be. Is he going to get any charges? Is it going to be a hung jury? And so they're trying to make a lot of his felony counts through the media. And it's who is actually talking. And it's, yes, you have Robert De Niro, but more importantly, you have the two officers that suffered under the January 6th riot. And I think that is what makes them much more important to the American public right now.
Yeah. And Susan, I want to read from you part of a piece in the New York Times today. It says, for a time, it seemed Biden thought the Trump's clinching of the Republican nomination, which he did in March, would cause voters to focus on the former president. Then the hope appeared to be that Trump's having to show up in the New York City courtroom and the resulting media frenzy would bring his opponent to the front of voters' minds. Neither really did the trick. Now the Biden campaign is trying to take matters into their own hands. Do you think this trial went the way that the Biden campaign thought it would go?
I think not. And this is the story of the last 9 years since Trump emerged as a political figure, that things happen that his opponents assume are going to be very damaging, and then they prove either not to be, or they even prove to be helpful, as his indictments were during the Republican primaries. So I think there is some surprise among Democrats and among the Biden campaign that there's not more reaction to some of the disclosures of the trial and the kind of narrative arc we heard today in the closing arguments. The fact that so many Americans now believe there is a political motive behind this trial, or it's not fair for Donald Trump. And we'll see what the verdict is. I mean, a verdict, an acquittal would be a huge victory for Donald Trump. A hung jury, maybe also a victory for Donald Trump. The question is, if he's convicted, what is the effect of that?
I mean, Deepa, from your reporting, what could be the effect of that? Because it seems the Biden campaign wants to change the trajectory of this race and this campaign. The president had the campaign trail to himself for a long time now. But the verdict, one way or the other, will it make that much of a difference, especially if he's found not guilty?
I think that will be interesting to watch. If he is found not guilty, then we're going to hear the rhetoric from Republicans. This is a witch hunt. This is, all politics and politically motivated. But you might see more, reaction of Donald Trump. He'll be back on the trail. You'll see more of him. And honestly, that's what the Biden campaign kind of wants. Like, they want Americans to turn on their televisions and pay attention a little bit to what Donald Trump is saying at these rallies, at these events. And so in some ways, it would complicate things. But I think for a lot of reasons, there are folks on the Biden side who are hoping that Americans are paying attention to what Donald Trump is saying a little bit more. So it might kind of work both ways.
Yeah. And Lance, guilty or not guilty, is this going to impact the Trump campaign?
Well, the Trump campaign's been fighting a two-front battle right now, and as somebody who's been on a presidential can tell you, fighting one battle alone is pretty difficult. So fighting two, they've done a really effective job at messaging. I would argue that the verdict, the public opinion verdict, is pretty much in on this thing. I mean, they don't really care too much about it, or if they do care, they're still supporting Donald Trump over the course of these last several weeks. So I would argue that the verdict is in with the public opinion right now.
I mean, I wonder if a conviction is different.
I think, and not
if
everything
12
is
jurors, and this has been a serious trial. The judge has gotten a lot of praise for the way in which he's run it. The jury seems to be paying close attention. If all 12 jurors agree on a conviction, maybe that has an effect, not with the core Trump supporters, but with some of the swing voters that will determine this election.
And they've indicated that. They've indicated, a lot of the voters saying, well, we'll vote for Trump except if he has a conviction, because then all of a sudden it is coming out of the political space and back into that of jurisdiction, making sure that at the end of the day it was done lawfully of what they decided. So
yeah,
that's right.
Well, thank you so much, Deepa, to Susan, to Maria, Teresa, and to Lance. A lot to talk about, and we'll have a lot more to talk about, I'm sure, in the coming days.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.